Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the show. I am Hodey Johns.
I'm Archie Flower.
And this is Enemy of My Enemy. We are also going to be having Jacob Weinegrad and Brian Wolgamuth joining us. They are just a few minutes late, but today we are going to talk about something that libertarians love to talk about, that anybody who's not a libertarian hates talking about. And I wish more libertarians would be aware of that. But we're going to have a nice little rumble tonight. Anarchy versus minarchy is the subject matter. There's never a nice way of defining these phrases, and I am sure that we will spend a good part of this first hour talking about how we define things and how we define them personally. And so I'll ask each of our speakers to kind of talk about that. But we've got two pro-anarchy voices and two pro-minarchy voices. So to lead off the anarchy portion of your evening, or the minarchy portion, sorry, of your evening. I don't want to put that burden on you, Archie. Is Archie. Archie, go ahead, hit us with 10 minutes worth of thoughts about what minarchy, I guess, how you would define the two terms and why you find yourself in the minarchist camp.
Sure, Hodey. Just to put this out there, though, I repeat, I am not a pro-minarchist, okay? I'm an amateur minarchist. No one pays me a cent for any of this, okay? So what is minarchy? What is anarchy? I would say, from my point of view, that minarchy is simply the institutional or lawful use of force to defend human rights. That's what it's supposed to be. What it has become is the largest government in the world, the largest empire the world has ever known, not just in terms of raw power or materials, but also in, breadth and scope. We are literally global. We spy on pretty much everyone 24/7, as Mr. Snowden revealed. But the general theory and what is actually in practice are two very disparate things. And we need to realize that, one moment, audio issue. We need to realize that theory and practice are going to stay different until we can actually manage to find a way to bring them together. And until we do that, if we don't take into account the fact that, okay, we're talking about a practical everyday discussion versus a theoretical discussion, there's going to be a lot of semantics issues and talking past each other. So let's take this back to definitions again. What I define as minarchy, it is I take it very literally, the minimum amount of government needed to run human society, the absolute minimum. When I call myself a minarchist, I am being a truly literal SOB. So do I want laws against drug use? No, I don't. Why? Because if an adult is consenting to consume some sort of drug or other, substance, and they're not hurting anyone else or violating anyone's rights, it's nobody's business, or at least not in terms of law, not in terms of force. And we need to constantly remember that that's what this is about. When we're talking about government, we're talking about the use of force. Do I want laws against any particular religion? No, absolutely not. That's, in fact, one of the most vital things for me, is a wall of separation between church and state. Do I want laws against any particular activity that doesn't have a victim? No. End of story. The only laws I want are where someone's rights are being violated, have been violated, or are imminently threatened with being violated. For instance, a lot of libertarians will take the hardline position that drunk driving is not a actionable crime. I believe that it is actionable. I believe that you can absolutely pull people over and stop them from driving a 3,000-pound missile when it could easily take the life of someone just by sheer accident. I mean, you're not intending necessarily to hurt someone, but you are loading the gun, you are waving it around, your finger is on the trigger. You know, if someone does that in an actual crowd, anyone in that crowd is justified to use force to stop it. Same thing with drunk driving. And that's actually a really important point that I want to tie back into. Anyone is justified in stopping it. Minarchy isn't saying the government, you know, stands alone with this special group of powers or rights or authority. Every bit of rightful authority that the government has does come from being delegated by you and I and everyone else in society. And we can only delegate what we already have. I can't delegate, for instance, Hodey, you know, going through your wallet and taking out a 20 and saying, haha, this is Archie's now. Although I'd like to. Can I borrow some money? No? Okay, fine. Anyway, if I don't have the power to delegate, the government shouldn't have the power to enforce. Period. That's my version of minarchy. So that means that ultimately I want a society where all money that goes to the government goes there voluntarily. And I mean truly voluntarily, truly with informed consent. You know, none of this taxation at the point of a gun, at the threat of the loss of your livelihood, at the threat of being jailed, at the threat of being exiled outside of the United States, like McAfee. You know, he fled to, where did he go? Was it Spain? This is complete BS. The government doesn't have this authority because none of us do. We can't delegate that authority. Therefore, the government doesn't have that rightful authority. The only thing they have is more guns. They have might, but might does not and never has and can never make right. So minarchy to me is you, Hodey, and Brian, and I coming together and deciding on an institutional manner on how to use force to defend human rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In effect, there's really only two rights, in my opinion. I can't really figure out if there's anything separate from these two categories. Self-ownership, self-autonomy. We have the, you know, full authority over our own lives, and the right to reciprocal non-aggression. If someone aggresses against you, you are free to defend yourself, and others are free to defend you as well if you can convince them to, or if you just look like a sad case that needs defending, or whatever you may be. It's been about 7 minutes. Do you need me to go on?
If you feel good, Archie, I'm sure we can stall you for some time.
I think I've covered everything that needs to be covered. I will only say this. In all of my anarchy versus minarchy debates that produced any kind of real fruit, there was a fundamental agreement that most of the disagreements were semantic. Mm-hmm. I'll just throw that out there and say that we should just end the rest of the podcast and all go out for a beer. As long as you're paying, Hodey.
Yeah, I mean, you might be disappointed, Archie, if you're going to take money from my wallet with how much you get in there. But I didn't say it was a wealthy life being a video game writer. Thank you so much for your thoughts there. Archie, and I can tell this is probably going to be semantic as well. And it's important to understand a lot of these semantics. I mean, it's just when we use language, we're conversing in a medium that we're all supposed to share. But let's be honest, people can say the same words and not hear the same things. And people have different experiences with these words. And especially when you talk about something like anarchy, you are talking about something with a millstone around its neck. It is just there's so much history there, and there's so much disagreement. And I am talking from the time the word was conceived, Pierre Joseph Proudhon and like onward, there are people who disagreed with what it meant to be an anarchist. I am an anarchist, so it is my turn to speak now. And I am specifically an anarchist in the modern sense of the word. Language evolves, and therefore my view hasn't changed. In fact, I would say that I joined what, as I thought, was a minarchist because I love the old writings. I love studying. I love reading Marx and Proudhon and Adam Smith, and I mean, just a variety of guys, and came to the idea that I was a minarchist because of the way they defined it. The problem is that the way words work, and this is for my brother who's a linguistics major. Shout out to you, Woody, if you're listening. He is really good about this thing, and he says that language is whatever the majority of the speakers of that language would say that word is. So if somebody says it's a hot dog, a sandwich, it actually is if a majority or plurality of the people would say that, yes, it is a sandwich, then it is a sandwich. Because most people would say no, we can try to define it. But the problem is when we start using definitions, we get away from that language. We can say, well, by definition, because we put that bread, because it's meat between bread and there's some kind of sauce in there sometimes, it's technically a sandwich. The thing is, we can't be very technical about this, and we need to let a lot of those definitions go when we talk to other people, because they'll have preconceived ideas of what anarchy and minarchy is. Anarchism has evolved into a movement that I actually can get on board with, because I was big on the early minarchist writings that said government should be voluntary, government should be transparent, and government should be accountable. Those are kind of the magic three. And everybody listening is like, dude, that's anarchy. It's not until you go like 10 years ago and after. And so for me, it's really a major shift in the modern anarchist movement. Anarchy has grown up since its early days. When you are reading some of those early anarchists, you're reading about, and I am not even joking about this, you're reading a lot of genocide, a lot of death, a lot of here's why you have to murder your neighbors, a lot of here's why you're not allowed to talk to your neighbors, a lot of here's why you're allowed to talk to your neighbors about certain things, because anarchism was assumed to only be possible with no hierarchies. And this included intellectual hierarchy. So you weren't allowed to know more than your neighbor. And there were some everybody had a creative way around it, right? There was like very few people, I mean, there were some, but very few people that were like, if you're too smart, we have to give you a lobotomy or something. But there was a lot of, let's have you know a lot about plumbing and you know a lot about carpentry, and then you two are never allowed to converse, right? Like, and that's, to me, ludicrous, right? That requires a force that would make the state look like less of a state, right? Like it would require so much invasiveness. Now, I know I've spent my first few minutes here dunking on the old anarchists. My thing is they got the ball rolling, much like how we can say, hey, the founding fathers didn't get it perfect, but they got the ball rolling into something great. Maybe they didn't have everything right about freedom of speech, but hey, at least they took a step forward. I appreciate the anarchists of old for getting this ball rolling. I accept their imperfections, and I believe that we are in a better place now to where we can actually talk about anarchy and have a really good place for it. My basic problem with minarchy, fallen man presiding over the fallen man. If mankind is imperfect, giving mankind authority over other mankind is hardly going to call for perfection. In fact, the idea of running for a position that is a position of leadership will naturally attract somebody who wants that kind of authority. If you want to lead and rule over other people, it will naturally appeal to you. The rule of law is always imperfect. I strongly dislike the rule of law because there is always a way to make everything justifiable. And classic morality decisions, when people talk about ethics, they always say, well, is this ever permissible? And somebody will say no. And you can almost always make some contrived position in which it is permissible. And so common sense tells us what is ethical much of the time. Unfortunately, when we attempt to codify something that sounds like common sense and then some particular crazy situation happens, we find ourselves saying this law was imperfect. Case in point, eminent domain. targeted the mafia with it. We said, hey, we got to get rid of the mafia. They're clearly operating this ice cream store to try and sell liquor. They're beating people up in the back. Hey, it's just going to be against the mob, right? Well, obviously, eminent domain grew well beyond something that anybody had ever conceived. That's because of the way the law was written, made it possible to abuse. And when you hold people to that standard, then all of a sudden they say, well, this is the way it always is. As a Christian, I have an attachment with anarchy. I actually didn't come to anarchy because of my religion, but I was recommended this book called The Kingdom of God is Within You. And it really impressed upon me, these are two, that nationalism and governments are irreconcilable with my faith, the way I practice my faith. If you are a minarchist Christian, I'm not saying that you can't do it. It's just the way that I understood it. I was unable to make that different in my mind. And one of the things the Pharisees tried to trip Jesus up on was to say, oh, you're not supposed to work on Sunday, or you're supposed to take a certain amount of steps and not deviate to the synagogue on Sunday, right? But what if an ox falls in the mire? You're supposed to save your ox too. Oh, those laws contradict, and you better not save your ox, right? Because obviously going to church is more important. And Jesus is like, of course you save your ox. These laws aren't meant to contradict. They're supposed to be common sense, and you're supposed to understand what they are in their heart. And this is his explanation. And so the thing is and in fact, frequently, even in the Old Testament, although we know the Old Testament for these archaic and terrible laws, God is frequently telling them, I do not like laws. I do not like the rule of law. I do not want to give you any laws at all. And these people end up writing them anyway because they find that they must, or believe that they have to. And these laws, because they get codified, they sound like good ideas. It sounds like a good idea to say nobody can cheat on their spouse. But then you find somebody who has an impregnable divorce contract, and somebody who's abusive, and some extenuating set of circumstances, and suddenly we're stoning somebody for having a meaningful relationship that was way better than their marriage was. And this is why I don't feel that the rule of law can ever be codified. Law should not be codified. Common sense can't be codified. We'd like to try to have altruisms, but ultimately nothing is more important than that love. The minimum will differ from person to person. When we say, what's the minimum amount of government we should have? Minarchists will typically disagree. Archie, for example, suggested drinking and driving, that should be cut down on. Some people will suggest minarchy, we should have a border, but not much else, like a strongly enforced border, but not much else, or a really strong social safety net, but nothing else. And the problem is that until there's consensus there, the minarchists are it's a tough thing to define, because everybody's minimums are different. To say this is the minimum of human decency. Now, myself as an anarchist, I actually have relatively high minimums. What I would say is necessary. I believe in positive rights. I believe that it's not just liberty. It's that we need to create a culture that empowers people to embrace and love that liberty. And that means using people's pronouns if they want to. That means that we help our neighbors out when they're in times of trouble. I'm very anti-brutalist in this way, to say that we need, as a community, to take these tasks upon ourselves to care for our neighbors and our friends and our family. And we need to take that very seriously and build them up, because individualism doesn't work if individuals don't feel their individual value is very good. And so I actually have a very strong opinions about the type of culture and climate that anarchists need to create for themselves. And that's why I believe that the reason I'm bringing this up is because I do think that we need to address the elephant in the room here for both of us. Why hasn't minarchy worked? Why hasn't anarchy worked? My specifics with anarchy is we haven't tried developing an anarchist culture. We've attempted it a few times. We've tried to get really hardcore on the philosophy. We had some ANCOM countries, nations of people that cropped up, that made it for a few decades, and then an authoritarian came in and wiped them all out. We need to say, what was the problem? What do we learn from these lessons that makes it so that anarchy or minarchy is possible? For me, I don't have a solid answer of how minarchy would work. I do have a pretty solid answer of how anarchy would work, because I feel that individual that feels empowered, that believes in themselves, that trusts in themselves, and then has other people around them, that they build up their communities and the people that they know can form an anarchist society by everybody having that strong conscience. Now, not everybody is going to have the same conscience, but there's also a conscionable way to disagree, right? A big one here when we talk about homesteading, how property works. Property is always convoluted when we talk about it in various circles. It is very difficult to define what makes property personal. Yet we all kind of accept that it's somebody's right, somebody that we should be able to have property. Some would say land. Some would say you're allowed to own your toothbrush. Some would say, well, who are you to say I'm allowed to own 1,000 acres or 1 acre or whatever it may be? But there becomes a point, like when a plant buys the only drinking source because they bought it from a government institution, when we all kind of go like, yeah, that's not right. And so you kind of know it when you see it, but it's hard to exactly put into words. And I think we need more of those instances where we put them into words. Or how about when somebody builds a house too close to another house, or it's technically their property, but you've obstructed their view and you decrease their land values. There's so many complex issues that if we try to get into it and litigate and make a law out of every single one, it's never going to end. And we're going to end up with a bunch of laws that oppress a bunch of people that make nobody free except the elite few who establish these and know the ins and outs and have crony allies. Indeed, that's what's happened. So I do feel a real strong attachment with anarchy at this point in my life. And it was a debate with Larkin Rose, and really Larkin just said, you've been an anarchist all along, you just don't know it. But that would come as a surprise. It's just to everybody in history that's called themselves an anarchist would probably not consider me an anarchist. But it's just this feeling that I have inside of myself. This is the right way to do things now. It is a personal thing. I accept that it's also an opinion. A lot of this has a lot to do with my faith. A lot of it has a lot to do with my observations, but I understand that other people's observations and experiences are going to be different. And that's why I think it's important to have conversations and debates like this one. Brian, it is now your turn with some more Minarchy, and then hopefully we bought enough time for Jacob to join us and give his view on anarchy, and then we can have a few minutes of discussion. So go ahead, Brian. Tell us how you feel about Minarchy, what it means to you.
Real simple. The state's awesome. You guys are wrong. No.
Darn.
I'm done. Hey, I win. No.
That does it for the show, guys.
Yeah. Archie and Hodey, you guys touch on some great points. But the thing is that I kind of come to this from a pragmatic perspective, maybe. I'm agnostic, so I have a Christian background. So I view a lot of different things about perfection and things like that. I think in a slightly different lens, but it comes down to the minimum state that we need to be able to to improve society. I think that's the primary figure right there. Do we need a police force? There are a lot of people on both the left and right that would love to get rid of the police. But what replaces that? And is it necessarily going to be better? If we're having gunfight at the OK Corral in a lot of places, does that make us a better society? Or is everybody paranoid then about leaving their homes and going to work? So there's, I think, some things we can do to make things better. But, the reality is there's going to be a lot of the state that, unfortunately, that we as humanity have to live by. And the big part is obviously looking at the ability to have a monopoly on force when it comes to laws and things like that. This tends to tick off a lot of anarchists. But the question, like you said, Hodey, the divorce case, the person that, if we change the law to where change it to where there's a contract that you can never get out of a marriage, and may have made great sense, when you were 19, it makes terrible sense when you're 25, and have that enforceable by possibly, either extreme, cruelty or death, is probably not a contract that we as a society want to go ahead and allow to happen. So it gets down to the end of it, basically, of what we have right now isn't working. We know that. Can it be better? Absolutely can be better. But right now, I think the idea that we can either turn it down to like 0.1 or 0 is probably not going to make society better overall, especially in the interdependent, technologically advanced society that we're in right now. There are many ways to do that, but I think we can talk about when we get into the meat of it.
Well, cool. Thank you. Thank you for both for your thoughts there. Jacob is not here quite yet, so I guess we can start a little bit of discussion before he gives his exact thoughts. Ron, by the way, I see your comment now. If you're having trouble following along, sometimes the internet can be a finicky thing, but I think we're okay. Everything's looks stable on our part. All right, so I wanted to ask everybody this, and let's start with this question because I wanted to make sure everybody got a shot to answer it. I'll start with you, Archie, and I'll have to answer it myself. How do we do minarchy in a way that it actually stays minarchy? How do we make that change? That because governments have tried this before and it just hasn't worked out. You've noted it in your opening statement. What do we do differently this time that makes it different than last time?
I would contend that even if we start anarchy, if we don't have a way to preserve that state against human nature, we will see a state arise and continue to grow. I would say that one of the best ways to make sure that that growth can't happen is that we need a literal mechanism for the people of each, whatever polity it is, to hold those people in authority very directly accountable. For instance, if a politician votes for an unconstitutional law, say a magazine size ban, you can't have a 30-round magazine, which is flatly against the Constitution of most states and certainly against the Second Amendment, if not other portions of the federal Constitution. Any politician violating their oath should be charged with perjury, and the people themselves should be able to levy that charge. And what you then have in effect is Jefferson's let's have a revolution every so often idea literally put into practice anytime a politician tries to threaten someone's rights.
Okay. I'll answer the question before I make you answer here, Brian. Because anarchy has had some problems. The debate that I went into, Lark and Rose, in fact, this was almost the entire crux of my argument. I love history, and anarchy's happened a few times, and it's exactly what you said, Archie. It's turned into statism either instantaneously, and in some ways to look at it, it was kind of always statism, but the people didn't have papers. They just had a lot of violence. There was somebody who went to Jamaica once when Jamaica was considered an anarchy. And the businessman, after he left, was like, these people are calling themselves anarchists, but this is aristocracy. Like, it's just aristocracy without being codified. And that kind of is illustrates a lot of what anarchists, I think, need to address more of. Because this is the hang up with our history. So, of course, we have to address it. For me, I think the biggest difference comes from culture. I'm glad I'm saying this without Jacob here, because this is, while we are both anarchists, I think he will probably disagree with me a little bit on this one. But I think a strong culture is required to have that anarchy. This is actually one of the reasons that when I look at the Bible and I'm like, well, if anarchy is so important, why wasn't Jesus talking about it all the time? All he was talking about was love and culture and respect and healing and building and construction. And I was like, oh, wait, maybe that's what you have to do first, is have that in place. I have played with politics. I've diddled around with politics. I've always worked on some campaign staffs and such. I'm pretty much done with it at this point. I'm not one of those people. I actually stand by my other debate with Lark and Rose about voting. Another good one that you should see. Because I still believe that if there is a way to make less evil, you should make less evil. You should do what you can to stand up against it. I don't really see the political avenue right now as functional. which is why I've kind of abandoned it. But I do stand up by what I said. If there's a law that says, hey, all drug offenders out of prison, heck yeah, I'm voting on that, you know? And I'm not just going to say, well, it's unethical to hit. It's like, hey, no, like sometimes this is what needs to happen. But I do think there's a cultural build that has to happen. Politics is always downstream of culture. And I think that if we really want that anarchy, we have to make a cultural difference first. You know, like Jesus Christ or like Martin Luther King or like however it may be, you just say, I need to build up and empower these people. What you had is a lot of people that were, especially during the fall of feudalism. There's actually this beautiful time of anarchy after the fall of feudalism, but what happens is then more kings and lords take over, and they had no real defense against it, because there wasn't this feeling of freedom, and it takes work. I'm going to give you another biblical example here, but the Jews, when they are leaving Egypt, it's not like they stopped. It's not like they became freedom lovers when they were released. It took them 40 years. And during those 40 years, they built a golden calf. They begged to go back to Pharaoh. They said, hey, look, at least he gave us guaranteed food. At least we had guaranteed work. At least we had all these other great things. And it takes time, right? It takes time and work. And we can't just hope to replace a pharaoh with another pharaoh and then hope that that leads to some kind of anarchy or whatever it may be. So like for me, I think the way anarchy needs to be different, and what makes it more different, what people are kind of starting to do, a lot of that agorism stuff about just saying, I'm going to live this life. I'm going to encourage other people to live this life too. And then I'm going to carry on a culture. Now, obviously not all anarchists live up to this, especially the most vocal ones, but I'm going to live a life that teaches love and peace and kindness and respect and compassion. And that's really when people would kind of say, if you have a large culture, that you start to see the state's aggression as something more sinister. When they take their violence out on like drunk drivers, it's hard for me to suggest the state is invalid if I constantly rail against how they pull over drunk drivers, because that's a dumb decision that puts other people's lives at risk, including their own life, that could hurt people. Even if I think they shouldn't enforce it, it's not a great place for me to take a stand. Whereas when they go around pouring bleach in food that we give to the homeless, suddenly people look at anarchy and they say, okay, you know what? Maybe they got a point. And we need more of those instances of them saying maybe they've got a point. And I just feel like that's the better way to go about it. I'm also big on peaceful revolution. I think that's one of the other times to get there, but that's probably I think violent or peaceful revolution is probably a conversation for a different day. Brian, how do we keep minarchist government minarchist? Oh, you're still muted.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
I hit the button and I hit the wrong button. The first thing we have to look at with minarchism is trying to work the existing system downward. The best way to do that is look at where the biggest spending is, because I got news for you. The corruption comes from the spending. So if we're not looking to
What's up, bitches?
I was gonna wait for him to peacefully join. I probably should have left him out of the side.
All right. What are you filthy statists doing? All right. What are you talking about?
Okay, well, this will be fun. So before I was so rudely interrupted here, the thing is that no one is looking at like the spend in the NASA budget, although yes, it is full of garbage and basically where I'm looking for here is wasted money and corruption inside of it. The big ones are where the big dollars are, where we're spending $1 trillion a year on basically health, human services, things like that, to be able to prop up various departments that are just basically just cash gives to all the large businesses and things like that. But this kind of gets, how do we dial that back? And I think the simplest way to do that is simply to say that all of these big programs are the responsibility of the states. That's your first easy step. Right there, if you take Social Security, you take all these health programs, the medical programs, and things like that, push them back to the states and let the states figure out how to run them. Get the feds out of the business, because A, it stops the feds from printing money, and B, it puts the onus on the states to be able to be better at what they're doing. I got news for you. A lot of these states want to do better in some cases, and there are companies that do things better. But by the way the government, especially the feds, have structured things, there's no incentive for competition. If anything, there's the exact opposite. You better be along in line with what everybody else is doing and not rock the boat. Because if you rock the boat, got news for you, we're going to make life miserable for you. You're going to have to take whatever profits you make and give them to the others that aren't really doing much, and keep the ship going forward. And maybe we'll go ahead and get our politicians to throw you out for whatever BS reason. So a couple things I wanted to address through. Number one, Archie, when you first said magazine size ban, I originally was thinking of Rolling Stone magazine and thinking, why the hell would we worry about the size of the magazine? But I think they're going to thank you for saying that. Perjury, though, I think that you kind of destroy the balance of the state. We have three pillars: the executive, legislative, and judicial, in theory sometimes. But I think you put a lot of onus on the judicial branch and give them a lot of power to be able to, lean one way or another. If you look at a lot of Supreme Court decisions, they're not, 9-0. They're 5-4, 4-5. Very close decisions that can say something's constitutional or unconstitutional. And with the decision being pretty much a yay or nay, don't get me wrong, you can get into the intricacies of it. I don't think any sane person would want to sign their name to it with the idea that they're going to do hard time because somebody is feeling like he owes somebody a favor in the Supreme Court and says, you know what? Yeah, that law is right. But you know what? There's this interpretation, getting back to what Hodey was talking about earlier, that, you know what? I think that's a little different. So I'm going to say it's unconstitutional and you're going to jail. Yeah. So, the idea of a revolution every 20 years is a lovely idea. If you like murdering about 10% of your population every 10 years, 20 years. So, hey, whatever works for you guys. Hodey, I think getting back to what you said about Agorist, I think 80% of the population is right there with you. We just want to put our heads down, get our jobs done, leave us alone, get the government out of our lives, and be able to live our lives. There's 10% of us that probably are a little crazy and probably have other psych issues that will prevent that. And then there's the 10% that honestly, I don't want to use the term evil, but boy, they're really self-centered and want to get into politics usually. And there's the people that keep getting drawn in. So, but how do we get rid of evil? If someone has a formula for it, let me know, because I got news here. We've been trying to do it for, millennia now and not had really any good luck with it. But what I've seen happens is if people aren't bored and they aren't losing in society, they generally end up being good people and they don't get drawn into it. So that's one way to do it. Lastly, success, everything else, empowerment brings the best out of humanity overall. Getting rid of government isn't going to make people more successful or more empowered. Getting it down to where it's the least amount of influence in their lives, that's going to make them more successful and empowered. And that's where I think we have to have at least a set of laws that we all agree upon. No, we didn't sign on at birth, but the reality is we're here. We live in a culture. We have to abide by laws. We don't want 7.2 billion states running around, laugh at it all you want, with legal papers being Sheldon Cooper's wet dream of roommate agreements and stuff like that. Hey, I'm sitting next to you on the bus. Please sign this 20-page disclaimer so you can sit next to me, type of thing. So,
all right.
We live in a society.
We live in a society. You're good. No, Jacob, it's actually going to be your turn. Give us up to 10 minutes about what anarchy and minarchy mean to you and why you've chosen anarchy. And then I'm going to give you the same question I gave everybody else once you're done with that. So hit me with the anarchy.
I'm an anarchist because I don't believe you can get rid of human evil, like Brian was talking about. But a good start would be to stop institutionalizing it. Let me define what anarchy is in my mind. Anarchy is not chaos. Anarchy is not no rules. Anarchy is not everybody just doing whatever they want to do with no consequences. Okay, so if at any point the rest of the podcast, the debate against anarchy is, we need rules and chaos is bad, then those are strawman arguments against anarchism as I'm laying it out. Anarchism just means, in its simplest expression, that no human being has the right to enslave another human being. That is literally it. It means no masters. It means that everyone owns themselves. So then people will reflexively go, but what about this? And that's really the argument against what I just laid out. Isn't that people go, well, no, slavery is great. I mean, some people maybe, but for the most part, there's not a lot of people arguing against anarchism because they like the idea of people owning other people, or the idea that, of people stealing other people's property, because that is what the state does. The state is a institution of coercion. If you don't believe me, try not paying your taxes. See what happens. It's pretty, it's not voluntary at all. And if you say voluntary taxation, that's like saying consensual rape. It's just, these terms don't go together. I'm sorry. So the state is an institution of coercion. If something is important, if something needs to be done in society, I understand when like a communist or socialist isn't down with the complete abolition of government, but when fellow people who call themselves libertarians and who understand capitalism and understand free markets don't understand anarchism, I just think, I guess you guys don't really understand or really trust free markets. Because if you want something done, yes, now Brian's laughing now.
I muted for a reason because I knew that was going to happen. Continue.
The best way to make sure that something is done and that something is done effectively is that people are incentivized if they do a good job, and disincentivized, or there's some kind of market consequence if they do a bad job. And I think Archie and Brian would agree with me in terms of that basic market principle, that this is why free markets work.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not at all disagreeing with that. There's a lot of others, but please continue.
Yeah. So we agree on that is why free markets work, is because because of this those incentives I laid out there. What the statist has to prove, the minarchist has to prove, is that the market is incapable of handling the things that the statist thinks a monopoly of power, a monopoly of centralization is required for. It's not up to me to prove, because it's like proving a negative. And it's like, even though I'm a Christian, it's kind of like when the atheist is to say, like, if a Christian, like, if I go to Archie's an atheist, or at least not a Christian. If I go to Archie and I say, it's your job to prove God doesn't exist, he would be right to say, no, it's your job to prove he does exist, if you're trying to force the idea of belief in God on me. And that is correct, by the way. That is the correct answer in a philosophical argument. But in the same way, okay, like, my belief is that humans don't have the right to initiate force against other people. That is the non-aggression principle, correct? We believe that the initiation of force is always immoral. And that is really what this debate about anarchism versus minarchism is. It's not about even just like the consequences of market governance versus monopoly governance. It is about it is really an argument over morality and ethics, and it is really getting down to the nitty gritty of do you own yourself, or are you just because you were born in a specific geographic area owned by a pre-existing government structure that you didn't consent into, that you didn't sign anywhere. And I'm sorry, the social contract is not a good answer to this. It's just not. We would reject that. The problem is that there's morality doesn't have this ambiguity to it that the minarchists think that it does. As an anarchist, I can say that murder is wrong. I can say that it is always wrong to kill someone. I can say that theft is wrong. I can say it's always wrong to take something that belongs to somebody else. The minarchist has to make all these exceptions and then justify it. And I've never heard a good justification other than well, like the only consistent minarchist position is, well, it is evil, but it's a necessary evil. And it's like, okay, but then we're going to have a conversation about how you think that the only way that, we can get things done is through, like, you've already, to me, given up the argument at that point. Because if something, if something is so important in your mind, like the only way to get X is that we have to do evil to get it, I'm going to say, we probably don't need X. I'm sorry. Like, we can probably live with it. If the only way that we could have roads was that we had to steal from people and threaten force against them, I would say screw roads. We don't need roads. But fortunately, it is actually not that hard to lay out flat stretches of asphalt. You know what I mean? The government, here's the thing. The government doesn't do anything. The government is a euphemism. The government is just a label for people. The government doesn't really exist, people. The government is just a label for the actions of other individuals. Always, there's always a person doing something. So when I say that anarchism isn't the rejection of governance or the rejection of rules, like, listen, I want there to be courts. I want there to be security. I want there to be a lot of the thing. Like a lot of this is not that I want a completely different society in terms of like, I think we should all move back into the jungle. You know what I mean? And I'm not like an anarcho-primitivist or something silly like that. Like, I'm not against a lot of these societal norms. What I'm saying is that you don't need a system called the state that exists through the initiation of coercion to get these things. That there is actually a lot of good arguments from anarchists, and not even just of anarchists on the right, of anarchists on the left too, on how these things can be provided by the market, on how social cooperation through the market can provide for a lot of these things that we want. There are ways to have contracts enforced without a monopoly entity that exists through the initiation of force. And that's all I'm arguing for here. I'm arguing for moral consistency. I am saying that if murder is wrong, and theft is wrong. And what's that libertarian mantra? It's wrong to hurt people and take their stuff. No exceptions. There are no exceptions.
I don't think. I'm sorry. I'm going to chime in on this one here. You own a food stand. 5-year-old comes up, takes an apple off your food stand. Do you have the right to shoot them?
No.
Okay. You've just destroyed your entire argument right there.
No, I didn't.
They took from you. And
reciprocity.
As a private actor, hang on, let me finish.
Reciprocity.
Okay, so wait, so you are putting morality into this, and you're putting limits on this.
No, I'm saying
you are. You just
a
did.
violation. No, a violation of the NAP can be corrected. But if somebody steals, like if a 5-year-old comes up to me and takes an apple from me, and then I kill him.
Yeah,
I'm not seeing the ridiculousness of that argument.
No, hang on here. This is what the ridiculousness of your argument is, unfortunately. You just said there's no social contract. I didn't sign up for this. Okay? And then you said private enterprise is going to handle this in a societal way. Society's going to come in and handle all of these pieces without enforcement of the state. So that 5-year-old comes up and steals that apple from your apple cart. That's theft. You just said theft is always wrong. So is murder. Murder's always wrong. And you, under the ability to own your own property and own your own things, have a right to either retrieve your property or enforce that somehow. So what is the definition of where that line is? And where is it in this contract that I now have to make with 7 billion other people to keep track of? By the way, lawyers will love freaking anarchy. My God, you'd be... pages and pages of stuff. I need a card just to carry around all the consensual agreements I have. How do you handle that? Yeah. Oh, chop off his head. Yeah, there you go. We do that. We already have a country that does that. It's called Saudi Arabia.
If a 5-year-old comes and takes my apple, I'd probably just be like, okay, you took my apple.
Okay, right.
I don't know. It's an apple.
But it's the thing. That's not you. That's you. That is you. Now, the guy who owns the Apple Card, let's just say he's that 10% who's like, you know what? I worked my ass off for that apple. And that was a great apple that kid took. And he was just being a little bastard. And he stole it from me. So now I'm going to take force out on him for doing it as a disincentive for everybody else to realize, don't screw with my apple cart.
Brian, your argument is that without the state, we're going to shoot 5-year-olds for stealing apples?
No,
I
but
just
there's
want to make sure I'm
but
steel
without
manning
the
your argument
state,
here.
without the state, there's no way in your world to punish that guy, because that guy's going to come back and say, hey, it was a non-consensual activity that a 5-year-old did. And you know what? He did that. And guess what? I got my piece back. I got my apple back. I'm taken care of. I'm happy now because you've gone ahead and said that the state,
the things don't equate. There's no culture of people unless they. I mean, put it this way.
Really? Would you like examples?
So Brian,
a culture of people that are so depraved that they would justify the killing of a 5-year-old for taking an apple are going to be just as depraved under a state as they would be without a state.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with you.
The state is not going to solve. If a culture is that depraved that it would be socially acceptable to kill a 5-year-old for taking an apple from your fruit stand.
Oh yeah.
That culture is not going to be made better by the introduction of monopoly of force.
Oh no, I'm not disagreeing with you. But what I'm saying is that your idea that there's some sort of magic power sitting there that's going to say we're all going to
magic. It's just
along.
People. It's not magic. It's called the free market. It's called
the free market. Okay, but guess what? I just free marketed that kid's head off so I could get my apple back.
Okay, but while we're speaking of examples, Brian, I decided to do a little Google search on what happens when a kid steals from a business, and I'm looking at several examples of 5 or 6-year-olds, and of them going to juvenile hall until they're 18, being taken away from their families, forced from them. So what you're saying is, I don't believe that in an anarchist society that people would accept Jacob's business that shoots 5-year-olds for taking their apple. Right. We live in a current society, in a current government that has evolved to the point where it is now putting children in prison. So how does this minarchy? How would you codify? Because you have to codify, right? This is the minarchist position. Codify it. You have to make a law that deals with this, because Jacob and I are just going to try to use common sense. And you're saying common sense might be different. Now you have to make the counter argument. You're not allowed. You must use a law. And so give me a very specific law that makes it so that this 5-year-old doesn't have any force, but it's also going to protect the business.
It's kind of what we do right now. The shopkeeper goes, give me back my damn apple or I'm calling your parents. And the 5-year-old, if they're with the parent, if they're a decent person, goes, oh my goodness, I am so sorry. Here, let me pay you for the apple. Or the shopkeeper calls the police, but the police walk up and generally go, here, put the damn apple back. Now, does that happen every time? No, of course not, because we don't live in a perfect society. In fact, we live in a far from perfect society where in the US, yes, kids are being put in jail because they talk back to their teacher, because they looked funny, because they wouldn't change their shirt, because they showed too much shoulder or too much knee in class or something totally ridiculous. But that's not look, the state has failed problem, because if that was the case, we would have most of our children in jail already, and we don't. Are there too many?
No, we just wait until they're 16 and they have a little bit of weed on them, or we just drop bombs. We just drop bombs on the brown.
Oh no! Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Trust me. The state that sits there and goes, it's okay that I bombed a wedding, but I think I got the guy we were looking for, kind of thing. Trust me, I'm not defending that. In fact, I would love to see those people hauled off in front of a judge, have a fair trial, and then promptly put in jail for the charges that are there. I would love that. But the problem is we have too much power in Washington, D.C. We have too much power in London. We have too much power in Moscow. All of these big centralized governments are too powerful. And yes, the idea is like, oh, Brian, you're making the anarchist argument. Well, yeah, I could make the anarchist argument in that.
Please do.
But I won't, because number one, I know in reality.
Show's over. Brian's making the anarchist argument.
I'm not going to, because here's the thing. Number one.
I'm just going to say this. If Brian converts right now, I won't be converting, so it would be 1-3.
I'm not going to make it.
Continue.
He's going to make
Minarchists make the argument that government is evil. There should be get rid of it, right? If the government is going to be inherently evil, I got news for you. There's a lot of things about people that are inherently evil as well. Do we
Sure,
get rid of
but
them?
my point is, let's
Do
not
we-
institutionalize the
Oh,
evil.
sure. Okay, then how do you handle it? Because you said in your thing that everything would be handled by mutual agreement.
Because the market is infinitely more correctable and
Oh.
influenceable than government is. Trying to
Wham!
roll back tyrannical government is nearly impossible. In fact, the only way that you usually that tyrannical governments become less tyrannical is because they either collapse under their own weight eventually, or there's violent revolution and they might set the clock back a little bit.
It depends on the country. I mean, Chile's doing pretty well, and some of the other countries that I grew up with that were dictatorships are generally doing well. Look at Spain. I mean, Spain, hell, was under Franco only 70 years ago, and Spain's a vibrant democracy. But I want to get back to one more thing. The argument that I love the most about libertarians is, I'm going to say it, I'm going to use the word, the R word, roads. Okay? So in a private world, if I build a road and I charge people or I let people use it, do I have a right to tell someone they can't use my road?
Yes.
Okay. Me and my buddy who control all the roads in town don't like Jacob. Jacob, I'm sorry, you cannot use our roads.
Okay.
Okay. Well, have a good life. Oh, by the way, anyone cannot deliver to Jacob. You cannot go to Jacob's. If you go to Jacob's, you get banned as well.
The worst case, so even if I grant you this hypothetical that is extremely
Private property.
fantastical.
No. How's it fantastical? It's private property. I don't want to take the risk. Let's say that you're a psycho.
The idea that an entire community would be so biased against one person. Oh, the criminal. Now, if your argument is I'm a criminal, maybe that's different. But if I'm not a criminal, the idea that
what's your incentive
entire
here?
Community of people is incentivized to keep me locked in my house is a little bit of a kind of silly, fantastical.
It's not silly at all. Hang on here. Jacob, you buy a road, you buy a house in this lovely subdivision, and you decide to be an asshole because you can be. Okay? You know what? I can be. Sure, some of my neighbors think I am already as well. All of a sudden, they go ahead and say, you know what? We don't want you using the road. The HOA paid for the road, and you have no right to use it because it's private property.
Right, but you're assuming that there would be a community in which all roads would be owned by by one person who would hate me, or by everybody. There'd be a lot of different competing roads, but somehow I've managed to piss every single person off equally to the point where they won't accept because again, businesses that have a habit of refusing customers for silly, stupid reasons tend to not be financially viable over the long term. You know what I mean? If somebody owns a road and they have a habit of every time I find somebody I don't like, I won't let them on my road. Then it's not only are they creating an incentive for a competitor to come in and be like, okay, we'll come use my road, but also the person like a lot of times the minarchist will be there are a lot of minarchists who would say that businesses would even in a minarchist state would have the right to discriminate based on race or sex. But the idea is that those businesses would go out of business over time because they're if you're not hiring the best person possible, if you're hiring just based on race or sex, and then you're excluding a lot of customers for those stupid reasons, you have a right to do it, but you're just not going to be as competitive, and your business model is just flawed in a way that's going to fail.
Can I put this in a way I think Brian would agree?
Yeah, sure.
Your half acre in this neighborhood is entirely surrounded by the road.
I knew we were going to get this. I knew it. The entrapment argument.
That's where he's going.
But that's the thing. I live in a subdivision that, unfortunately, don't even get me started about HOAs. But it has one road out. And all the land surrounding me is owned by other people. So if somebody came in, and HOAs do own the roads, they can sit there and they can do this as part of commercial law. Now you can go ahead and say, well, that's commercial law. But in an anarchist world, it's all community. It's all based on, the whole idea that we all, have agreements and things like that.
Give me 4 to 5 minutes to make a brief point here, and then I'll let Hodey go whatever direction he wants to go with this. I want to make a brief point here. A lot of the arguments against anarchy that you've made, Brian, a lot of other people make, they make a assumption about the culture. That's sort of the point I was trying to make earlier.
Oh no.
And so because they'll be like, well, what if people do this or what if people do that? And then the solutions that anarchists give are to be like, okay, but like, people for the most part, even if there are some bad apples, people tend to act in rational self-interest, and that people, most cultures kind of have okay, like, murder is bad, theft is bad, rape is bad, holding people hostage is bad, and a lot of the solutions that anarchists have come up with for these things, like the road encircling your property and you're trapped and stuff like that, or the apple analogy that you gave, they're solved by just like okay, well, basic social conventions would hold out that, like, if that the idea of reciprocity, for one, that like if somebody wrongs you, your right to rectify that violation of your property rights is only justified up to the point of a reciprocal, like restoring back to that neutral point. If you go above and beyond that, now you're the one initiating aggression. And most people understand that. Like, this is a basic part of most societies, most cultures. People understand the idea of reciprocity, that like if you come up and slap me and I burn my and like that was initiation aggression. You come up and slap me and I burn your house down. Most people recognize, yeah, like, okay, he slapped you and maybe you had a right to slap him back or defend yourself, but you went too far by burning his house down. These things do not equate. Just like if I steal $10 from you,
Right.
and then you steal $100 from me, then we'd be okay. Well, he stole $10 from you, and he should have paid that back. Maybe he paid it back a little bit of interest, but like he stole $10 from you, and now you stole 100 or 1,000. People understand that there's general. I asked for 3 to 5 minutes. Give me some time here. Now, when people argue against these solutions, it's usually because, like, okay, but what if the culture, what if people are so depraved that they would, okay, but if the culture is that depraved, the point I really want to drive home here is that a state doesn't make it better, right?
Oh, no,
because
I'm
politics is downstream of culture.
No one is disagreeing with you on that.
But that's my point, which is that, like, if you have a culture where it is the overwhelming norm that you wouldn't shoot a 5-year-old for taking your apple, then that argument doesn't hold.
What is the consequence for me shooting the 5-year-old that stole from my Apple cart?
The parents are probably going to shoot you, dude.
Okay, but I have a question for you. Hang on here.
Or they're going to hire a private security agency to come and there'll be other consequences.
Okay, fine then. And what happens when I shoot the parents then because they're coming to attack me? Because I felt entirely justified for shooting the 5-year-old, that little bastard who stole an apple from me. I'm going to make him an example.
I'm really frightened for the 5-year-old in my community right now.
No, but this is what I'm saying, is that you've opened a cycle of violence. You've opened that door for a cycle of violence in your system.
There's always potential in any system.
Right,
that, like,
there
violence
is.
Can
But I have a question for you.
Violence always begets violence.
Yes,
there's
it does.
Always that
but
risk.
hang on here. If I go and shoot that 5-year-old in our current society, what's going to happen? The SWAT team's going to come in, arrest my ass.
The same thing.
There's probably going to be 27,000 cameras that saw me do it. I'm going to get put away for life in a nice little box. I am against the death penalty. Trust me.
We lost our host.
Yes, we did. He just couldn't take it anymore. He figured that I was right.
It's anarchy in here.
But
no, it's Minarchy because you're outvoted.
Yeah. Hey, this is the other part that I get with the other part that I'm going to get into with the road argument.
Don't make people hop out, Archie.
Yeah. This is the part I'm going to get with the road argument. And this is where I get to it. What is the barrier currently in the United States to have your rights to be able to move across in a public square, publicly owned? If I sit there and I go ahead and protest, do I have a right to protest? Do I have a right to redress the government? Do I have a right to go to the government and redress them? Maybe not Capitol Hill nowadays, but anyhow, you get the general point here that the government cannot stop me traveling on a public road. There's a very high bar for them to stop me from traveling. That usually involves putting you in jail. Okay, that's the ultimate. That's the one. I'm going to throw you in jail and then you can't travel anywhere. But that's the point that I get with the road argument, is that a privately owned road is a great idea. Don't get me wrong. I would love to see that, especially on our highway system. But the reality is that there has to be a legislative piece behind it that says that we can't impede people's right to travel. But you balance that against the whole idea that I own that road and I have a responsibility. And if I let Mr. 17-time DUI on my road again, I may get sued because I let Mr. 17-time DUI back on my road.
You're making the anarchist argument for.
No, I'm not.
You're saying that people that own the road would be incentivized to keep people who have a record of DUIs off of it because.
Right. Oh, yeah. But why is that? Why is that? It's not because, oh, well, I don't want people to die. It's because I don't want to get the shit suit out of me.
Yeah, that's why free
But how
markets
does that
work.
happen?
That's
in
why
an
free markets
anarchist-
work.
How does that happen in an anarchist society?
Because what governments do is they actually shield corporations from liability. Whereas in an anarchist society, there's no government bailing out the businesses from liability.
How do I file a lawsuit against somebody in an anarchist society for being wronged?
There are. So this is just.
Name-
I don't know
name
if have you ever read the vast.
Doesn't matter what I read. You should be able to explain
literature?
to me in a minute. I can explain my minarchist view.
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
No.
That's how
The
arguments
truth-
work.
The legitimacy of an argument is not based in how quickly the argument can be made or how simple it is. Like, simplicity does not equate to truth. Sorry, some things take a little bit longer to execute, and I can't give you like the mountains of articles that have been written on the various ways that market law and private law and contracts would be developed in a free market society in 5 minutes in a podcast.
Okay. Here's a simple thing. I sell you an apple. You agree to pay me 1 Bitcoin for that apple. I won't make you use $1 because I'm not that evil.
1 Bitcoin? Holy shit, that's a lot.
It's a hell of an apple. I mean, I'm using it as an example, but this is one hell of an apple. This is the best apple. It's laced with like Coke and everything else. So
Brian
you
has
bite into
like
it and you're going to fly. Okay. So
if an apple was actually worth 1 Bitcoin, maybe you should shoot the fight.
I should have won the kids. But you just made another argument. Wait a minute, that apple's not worth a ton of cash.
11.
Yep. So anyhow, if you and I have a disagreement on that, I can sell you that apple for that 1 Bitcoin. You go, you know what? This apple isn't worth 1 Bitcoin. This apple is worth 0.8 Bitcoin, and I want my 0.2 Bitcoin back. Okay. How does that get resolved in an anarchist society?
Okay, so I would need a bit more context. So, like, what?
It's a private contract. You and I don't agree on a contract. You bought something. I delivered it. You didn't believe that what you bought was worth.
Was there a written contract for this?
Yes, we'll make it written. We will make it a written contract and everything.
Most people in an anarchist society, when they have a contract, there will be arbitration written into the contract.
Okay, who does the arbitration? And who
would be a third party private court agreed upon in the arbitration of, like, in the arbitration clause of the contract. It would be like, we agree on Google Court Incorporated is going to be the third party arbitration if there's a violation of this contract.
Okay, that's fine. So we have a third party arbitrator. I slipped in a piece there that said that it only had to be let me just finish up this last piece. I slipped in a part that it must be held in a specific location based on my availability. I suddenly am unavailable for the next 17 years.
So I'm trying to make sure I understand. You're saying that you would not show up to arbitration because you're unavailable?
I've put it in and said that until a mutually agreed arbitrator with this on a mutually agreed to time. Okay? That's in the contract. That's in the contract. It doesn't, we don't, I mean, if we're going to Sheldon Cooper a purchase of an apple where we have a relationship agreement that's this thick that we have to go through every single time we do every single consensual transaction.
Yeah, but I mean, again, this is kind of like you're making, I think, again, the fallacy I've been trying to avoid, which is, again, like, I don't think that for the most part, the sale of apples is going to need contract stuff. So, I mean, so it's not like when you say every transaction needs contracts that are this thick. It's like, well, not really, because there's a lot of transactions that people are going to make, and for the vast majority of transactions go off without a hint, without a problem at all. Now, for more complicated transactions that are about, property or services that are worth a lot more than an apple, that's where contracts get more and more sophisticated. And in a anarchist private law society, like, people are going to know all the pitfalls to avoid. So, like, they're going to make sure that the arbitration clauses are written in a way that, like, people, neither side is going to be able to come up with. I mean, now put it this way: most private courts and DROs, dispute resolution organizations, are going to have language in the contract to avoid such pitfalls. Now, if a DRO or a private court system had a contract that had a loophole, well, guess what? That can be solved here's the thing: anarchy is not utopia. Sometimes people do shitty things and get away with it.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about an anarchist private law system is that private company goes, oh shit, this contract has this big loophole in it. But guess what? We can fix it.
Yeah,
we can fix it, and we can get better over time. And this is where markets are better at running courts and private security than the government.
You're missing my point though on this, where I think that governments are better than the markets. I am never going to disagree with you on that. Okay, markets are way more efficient, way more nimble than a government will ever be. What I'm saying is that the lack of government in consensual transactions, things like that, sometimes is unfortunately what we call a necessary evil. Now, I know that word is probably a giant flame. Oh my God, Brian loves the state.
It just feels like you're making an assertion. Like you're putting the cart before the horse, like in this argument where you're like because basically there's literally a meme. Like I remember my friend Stephen Rose made this meme on his anarcho-Christian page where he was like, if you can't explain how the free market can't solve every problem in society in 10 minutes, then that's why the state is a necessary evil. It's like no, like
I don't agree. I don't agree with that. I can make the argument for the free trade argument. In fact, that was part of my master's work that I did with working on how free trade actually built bridges between a whole bunch of countries that really hated each other. If you recall, Israel and Saudi exactly weren't the best of friends for the last couple of centuries. Well, last century, really. But if you recall, that wasn't the case. But there was a lot of clandestine trade through Jordan that suddenly made things a lot more friendlier, and that they knew that this business was going on, but that the Saudis had to stay out of it because all of a sudden it was going to affect, hospital equipment, the ability to take care of their populace, and what happened over time. I am never going to say that the markets are going to suck compared to the government. The government sucks. The idea here is to have that portion of the state that we need for that 10% that's going to shoot the kid with the apple, okay, to be able to arrest them, as opposed to having some guy who says, I run an apple cart and I'm going to shoot the kid. And guess what? You know what? You can't do anything because I got my 3 guys here who are going to defend everybody coming.
I just don't think you've proved that the market can't solve that problem.
Oh, I know the market can solve it, but your argument was that the kid's parents are going to come back and blow my head off.
All right, so Jacob, Brian, appreciate your thoughts. Archie and I are going to finish this off just because I think we've got your loop, your infinite loop here. For me, look, and of course I'm going to agree with Jacob on this subject because he's right. And plus I'm kidding. He's an anarchist and he's obviously we're on the same side here, but I find that this does happen a lot as well. The hypotheticals of anarchy are worse than actual anarchy themselves. What's funny is there's actually legitimate reasons to dislike anarchy based on what's happened in anarchy in the past. But usually these are not the way it goes. So unfortunately, we as minarchists and anarchists have very few examples that we get to use of our system working out correctly, because there just don't exist. Literally, the Keynesian model of economics has taken over every single country in the entire planet. There's variations of it a little bit, but the Keynesian model is huge government. And so even the smallest of these is a very small, big government, right? And so it's unfortunate, but this is what we have. What we do have, and so people will talk about that's not pure anarchy, that's not pure minarchy, pure. We're never going to get a pure example, but what we can do is look at specific examples when there was not a regulation over something and see what happens. Or we can take little moments of minarchy and anarchy and say, I think that we would see more of this if this were to happen. I'm glad that Rhodes got brought up because this is one of my favorites as a libertarian to talk about because it is so frequent. Americans were asked their top 2 things that they're glad their taxes pay for. Number 1 was roads. Number 2 was parks. And I love to talk about both of those because those are 2 things that people do a lot better outside of the state. In fact, the oldest and most well-maintained highway in the United States was made by farmers in a single day, way back a long time ago. And it is a great example of saying there's a lot of fear. What if all these farmers decided to make it and then said that only white people could use it, or that only these people could use it, or they'd have to enforce that, and that would take work, and it would cut down on their market, and it would cut down on the very reason that people build roads to begin with, which is connectivity. right? And so there's actually a negative incentive there to begin with. It's possible, as what Brian said, if we were to go all contract, it's possible. The issue is it's not likely, and I do not believe it would be frequent. However, if Brian decided to make such a thing, one of the things that I love the most about Anarchy, if the situation becomes like that, is the competitive nature of it. To say that I can leave because they did not mandate that I use their system. And so I'm able to just say, like, your system sucks, and I would leave. And I believe that I would not be the only one. If they decided no Jacobs allowed, I would team up with Jacob. I would go team Jacob and be like, no, I'm not going to a place that says no Jacobs allowed on this road. Now this can work in ways that actually
Vegetarians Incorporated city.
it could be a restriction on some things that I actually would agree with. Nobody wants child pornography on their social media websites, and we could say no regulations ever, but people don't want it, right? You will lose more people by having it. And so there are some, is anarchy chaos? No, because there's a tremendous amount of order in this chaos that naturally abounds. This natural order.
Regulates.
Hayek talks about this a lot, and I think he's got a lot of good points when he talks about it. Archie, I will let you close off with the minarchist point, and then we're going to get into a piece of our mind. So go ahead.
There were 2 points I wanted to rebut that Brian brought up, and I forget one of them. The one that I remember is that he said that if we have revolutions every 20 years or so, like Jefferson recommended, it would be very bloody. My only rebuttal to that is a revolution can be of ideas rather than blood and destruction, but a revolution of ideas and culture. And that brings me into a point that I think we've all either explicitly or implicitly brought up, is that culture is vital to any method of how we're going to run things in a society. And in effect, I mean, how does the phrase go? Politics is downstream of culture. If you have a culture where 5-year-olds are shot for stealing apples, anarchy isn't going to fix that. Minarchy isn't going to fix that. You are in a truly screwed up society if you're shooting your 5-year-olds for taking apples. I mean, that's a plain fact. You have much larger problems at that time.
Brian, you keep putting Archie and me on the same side, okay?
No one. You have a really screwed up society. There's 300 million people in just this country, 7 billion on this planet, and 1% of them are freaking psychopath insane. Do the numbers on that. Okay, 1 out of every 100 people have a significant psychosis. Okay, you do the math on that.
I would like to
round them up. No, go ahead, Archie.
Let Archie finish.
You are permitted to finish your point. You got the last
one. I feel like on a metaphorical level, the 4 of us are in a structure fire in the North Pole. Okay, it's extremely hot inside, and the problem is the fire has gotten out of hand. But then there are people that are saying fire should never happen, and it's like, we're pointing out that yes, we're in a structure fire, and the fire right now is bad. But when we put this out, it's going to get really super cold. So there's a balance that we have to strike here. Fire is extremely useful if it's in, say, an internal combustion engine. Or, a propane stove. I prefer my eggs cooked in the morning when I make scrambled eggs. If we didn't have fire or some other form of heat in a controlled method, we're
Capitol
not
buildings.
Cook food. But if we,
did you just say Capitol building?
Just in Minecraft, just in Minecraft, guys.
Yeah,
not real life.
Ignore Minecraft.
Somebody's getting a visit from the FBI tomorrow.
In my minarchy, Minecraft is outlawed. Okay, so anyway, the same.
Oh, wait a minute! Now you just lost me.
The same energy that we can use to cook with can start, a house fire or a structure fire. So we have to be careful how we use these energies. Same thing with. Okay, Samuel. Same thing with
Sam wrote, minarchists just want want just the tip.
Yeah. Okay.
Anarchists want the full thing. Anyhow, continue.
Love it.
The same thing is true with how we create, the balances of society and how laws are instituted. We can go all in and become North Korea and say, everything you do has to be approved by some central leader, or we can say there's no rules whatsoever. And I know that's a straw man. I'm just saying that's the opposite of that. I'm not saying you want to go there, Jacob. I understand that. I'm just saying it's the exact opposite of complete centralization. I think we should be the most decentralized we can be. I think we should have the most voluntary society we can, while still coming together to uphold each other's actual rights.
Cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I would rather live in Archie's Minarchy than, like if Anarchy is not possible, I'll live in Archie's Minarchy over what we have now.
Yeah,
and
that's
do you understand? I'm still a minarchist. I would love,
but not Brian's. I won't live in Brian's Minarchy because
no Jacob's allowed.
Apples, and no Jacob's allowed. Yeah.
You realize,
for the record, if you do the no Jacobs are allowed on your road rule, I'm digging up your asphalt, Brian.
Okay,
and I'm repurposing.
That's fine. You can do that, but that's my property. You've just violated my property. Hang on. You see what I did to the 5-year-old?
And Brian's got nukes. He's psychotic. Yeah, don't mess with Brian.
There was one point I was going to make really quickly on this, and it's the one part that's most near and dear to me. Okay, there's a song by a band called 10,000 Maniacs. Most of you probably know them, I hope. Talks about we lived on Morgan Street, heard them screaming every day, and things like that. The father yelling, the mother yelling at these kids. And the lyric that says, basically goes, he's your kid, do as you see fit. Society 30 years ago, that was society back then. Okay. How does society handle something like that that's acceptable by society now and handle that later on in a minarchist world? Because again, you could say culture changes, and that's a great idea. Culture does change, and culture did drive a lot of this, but the laws were ahead of culture in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to child abuse.
Cool. Thank you all so much for your thoughts there. I'm going to give us a break, and then we are going to be right back with a piece of my mind. Thank you so much for hanging through the break, everybody. Piece of my mind. Now, we went overtime on the discussion today, which is totally acceptable. I mean, it's a big discussion. It's one that anarchists love a lot, and minarchists love to lose a lot. No, I'm kidding. I'm just messing with you guys. Minarchy is fun to talk about, but now it's time to get into something else. So usually we get about 10 minutes apiece. Because there's 4 of us and there's even less time, we're going to have to cut this back to talking about each piece, like maybe 5 to 6 minutes ish. So just to show some expedience here, fellers. I'll get it started with here. I want to talk about Andrew Cuomo. I really strongly, I have always disliked him. I was part of the Larry Sharpe campaign that that wanted to get rid of him, and was not successful. Now, here's the thing. You could have had Larry Sharpe, New York, and you got Cuomo'd instead. The argument, this was the lesser evil. When is the evil that's actually lesser going to show up? Because the argument is that this is going to be a little bit less evil. And I think if that were actually true, you would get a lot of libertarians to join you if things were actually less evil than the guy before. But what keeps happening? Immigration gets worse. Foreign affairs get worse. And this is, and I'm not trying to make this all about the president, but I just think Andrew Cuomo is a specifically great example about this. Because you just say he got worse as he kept running for office, and he kept feeling that power, and he kept feeling that nothing could touch him, nothing could stop him. He still could be right, frankly. I don't know what will happen. He murdered something upwards of 10,000 people with his executive orders. That's not really even up for debate. He covered it up. He tried to cover it up, at least. You don't try to cover up murders you're not responsible for. So That's just offhand, right? Made a bad policy, got 5 digits of people killed, and so that's that. Sexually harassed dozens and dozens, Harvey Weinstein-like numbers, and people kept ignoring it. We kept looking the other way. These stories kept coming out and kept coming out and kept coming out. And we just keep saying, oh, that's terrible. That's too bad, I guess. But at least he's not a Republican. Like, what? At some point, you just have to wake up and say, you have to have a limit. And I think that this is something that when we talk to normie friends of ours, is I think that it's fair to ask, to say, hey, I know maybe you're not a libertarian, maybe you're not an anarchist, maybe you're not a minarchist, whatever it is, whatever you are, what's your limit for when you say, you know what, I'm cool with the lesser evil until the lesser evil does blank. And I think that it's appropriate to ask, because I think there's a time when they say, hey, when they murdered, 10 to 100,000 people based on executive action, that's a line that I'm going to say, no, we don't cross that. Like, we don't do that. And I won't go that far. That's too much evil. I support the lesser evil. As soon as we talk about genocide or something, that's when I'm out. Because we're starting to cross a lot of these, especially with Andrew Cuomo. And there are folks who, I think Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden have called for him to resign, among some others. But the passion isn't there like the cries were for like Trump to resign, right? And at some point you got to be like, where is your intellectual honesty? Where's your intellectual integrity? Where is your line that you won't cross? Where is the point where you say, I'm not going to do it anymore? Andrew Cuomo's sexual harassment is despicable, and it's not really a topic for debate. Everybody knows he's a scumbag. But the issue is our system isn't doing anything to deal with it right now. It may not do anything to deal with it. He may step down, maybe. But if you sexually harass somebody, shouldn't something more than just saying, oh, you can't be a politician anymore, now go to the private sector, write some books, and make a few $1 million? That's disgusting. He's a despicable human. And I think that anybody that accepts anything that he says, you should treat with some concern. And I don't want to say treat them like they're trash, because I'm sure people had their reasons for voting for Cuomo. But I do want to point out that at some point that reason has to dissipate and just say that this is a bad person. This person has functionally murdered people and functionally sexually harassed people. And when I was reading the report, one of the big reasons that it actually went forward is because one of the people he sexually harassed was a police officer or was a cop. And of course, the state doesn't like you effing with other people of the state. You molest, 1,000 plus, future gymnastics people before you get caught if you're Larry Nassar, but you mess with one person. If if one of them's a cop, then all of a sudden now we got some problems, and now they're not going to have your back anymore. And so he's losing the support of the police because one of the people he's sexually harassed was a police officer. And that's one of the reasons why this is kind of new. And of course, the AG has determined that he is guilty of sexual harassment. Now they're saying, but should we press charges on this one? Man, like, imagine if this was your restaurant. I worked in restaurants, and so I'm familiar with this. And somebody just kept sexually harassing people and murdered a couple of your customers in the restroom. At what point do you fire them? Do you say this needs to never happen again? I am done. Andrew Cuomo is terrible. But if you're listening to this and you just think, where is that? I think that if you're a normie, and that's totally cool, or if you have normie friends, it's totally fine. But just ask them where their line is, and then hold them to it next time it comes up. To just say hey, because this will come up again. I imagine that Joe Biden is well past where anybody's line in the sand would be who voted for him, had we asked before the election. The problem is if you don't ask, then they can move their own goalposts, because nobody saw where the goalposts were before, right? So then they can move them and then say well, no, I voted for him because of this, this, and this reason. So really get to know your friends, ask them, talk with them, because the more you talk about it, you can say hey, remember when you said you voted for Joe Biden because you thought he was going to let all the drug offenders out of prison? Remember when you said you voted for Andrew Cuomo because you said you wanted, women's equality in New York? What do you think now? And it puts you by having these conversations. We're talking about a long-term strategy here. You don't have to make the point now, but the point gets made later. And I think that Andrew Cuomo is just a really good example of this because I spent a lot of time talking to New Yorkers about Andrew Cuomo. And these were a lot of the things that he's doing are directly against the things that people said they were voting for him for. And so these are the type of things that we have to say, okay, there's your line. I got it. Let me get back to it in a few years. And after he crosses that line, ask if you're still going to be consistent with that line. Because I think that that's one of the ways that people can call themselves out. They get some method of accountability. It's not that they're bad people. Everybody moves their own goalposts if they don't write it. A lot of motivational speakers tell you to write your goals down. Write what your plan is down. Otherwise, you're going to move your goalposts. I'll work out tomorrow. I'll work out next week. I'll work out next month. I'll work out next year. You write it down so that you say like, oh, I wrote down Tuesday. It's going to be Tuesday. Go ahead, swing around the table. Anybody comments about Andrew Cuomo?
Hey, if you go on CNN right now and take a look, the more important stories right now compared to Andrew Cuomo are MyPillow CEO's most outrageous theory yet. Okay, good to know.
Good.
People are flocking to Applebee's. Also good to know. The new seriousness of Amsterdam. Oh, Cuomo may have doomed himself. That's where you get to it. About
4 or 5 down.
Whole page down. Okay, the failure in this is on so many different fronts. It's not even funny. Our media is one job only, and that's to be the eyes and ears on what's going on in the world, especially in government. That used to be an honorable position. I think we're done with it being honorable. What's going on right now with the whitewashing of Cuomo's acts, which would get any of us fired from our jobs. Am I wrong?
No.
We'd all be in probably in jail. Especially if you, quote, went up to your person that was protecting you and said, quote, can you help me find a girlfriend? My criteria is finding someone who can handle pain. And that was witnessed. We would all be fired. But again, the more important thing is, by the way, Applebee's is up and the MyPillow CEO is saying some outrageous shit. Please watch 10 o'clock on Don Lemon. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Archie, Jacob, anything that you have to add about Cuomo?
I'm not going to say what I want to say because this podcast is more family friendly than not. I will simply say
I
that
blew through that. It's over.
steel bars should be in this man's future for the rest of his life.
Amen. Yeah. On the subject of the CNN thing, just as a side note here, Chris Cuomo, his brother, obviously works for CNN. CNN's not in hot water, but Chris Cuomo is, because they actually said, hey, do you want to take a break so you can help your brother? He said no. He helped his brother anyway. He said, I'm sorry, I helped my brother a little bit. And now these recent reports are finding out they helped him a lot of it, including how to publicly slander somebody who made an accusation against you, a verified accusation against you, and making speeches on how to call women liars in a believable way. Yay, Chris. Yay, CNN.
Oh, and did you notice the one part where some former Cuomo staffer who's now a Facebook executive leaked the intimate details of one of their accusers to Cuomo so that could be leaked to the media of one of his accusers? I
did see it. Somebody worked for Facebook, right? Yeah, somebody worked for Facebook.
Yeah. Glad you're protecting our privacy.
Preach. Jacob, give us a piece of your mind.
Wasn't prepared for this segment. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything that's really coming to mind. I guess. I mean, I would say I'm a little irritated lately, just with how little coverage there is with stuff going on in the Middle East. I'm ongoingly angry about that, though. But I mean, we're at the point now where there are people being deployed to the Middle East who were not even alive when like 9/11 happened. You know what I mean? So it's just, yeah, I'm tired of, especially, I think some people are starting to wake up to it, but even then, it's just, I'm just ongoingly amazed and astounded at the level of depravity and uh, awfulness that our government authorizes, in the name of ending, opposing terrorism. You know what I mean? So I just, we get a lot of times caught up in, you talked about like the stuff that CNN's talking about, like the priorities being out of whack, and the Cuomo story is, that's, the stuff he did is definitely awful and needs to be exposed. I mean, no argument there. But the human rights violations going on in the Middle East right now are just, I mean, heartbreaking. I mean, just completely. And, you know, I don't want to get back into the debate, but I mean, one of the reasons I'm so against the state is because of the uh, the ability to wage war. I mean, at my heart as a Christian, I'm very much anti-violence. I believe in self-defense, but I'm very, very anti-violence, and I'm always bugged when people overlook the stuff going on in the Middle East. But I'm especially frustrated at my fellow Christians who somehow try to connect Jesus when he said turn the other cheek to dropping bombs on children in the Middle East. So I mean, I don't have anything more specific to say other than that. That's something that's been weighing on my mind a lot lately, just thinking about where we are at this point in history. And I mean, just when you think about the government and the war on terror, like, it is the perfect war because it doesn't have a clear mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Like, World War II, the war in Vietnam, the Korean War, like a lot of these wars we can criticize, but at least they had, like, there was a point where you could say, "Oh, we won." The war on terror, like, I don't know. Like, is there a conceivable end in sight? And when people, even libertarians, start to go, "Oh, like with the entire 4 years of Trump, it was like there were some libertarians who were holding out hope that Trump was going to bring the troops home," and I was like, "Yeah, right." But then as soon as Biden took office, there's some people like, "Oh, he said he's going to have them out of Afghanistan by this date." It's like, yeah, right. And like, even if he does, like, they're not coming home. They're just going from one location to another. So, it's the war in the Middle East is something that we can't lose sight of. There's a lot of people right now talking about the lockdowns that are being threatened again, and COVID passports and all that, and important issues too, completely important issues to talk about. Extremely anti-lockdown, extremely anti, the idea of vaccination passports being pushed by any government agency. But a lot of this stuff that the state does is theater to distract us from the truly awful atrocities that they commit. And we have to sometimes, and like, even like a lot of the libertarian infighting pisses me off, because I'm just like, God, we're getting so caught up in what, like, if we try to explain what we're fighting about to some Iraqis or some people living in Afghan or people living in Yemen, they look at us and going like, okay, cool. Like, my wife died in my arms yesterday. My neighbors were blown to bits yesterday. You know what I mean? So, like, we gotta have some perspective, and let's try to, I guess, like, let's not get distracted at the stuff the state wants us to get distracted by. Let's continue to put the heat on them, to put their feet to the fire for the barbaric evil that continues on a daily basis.
Brian, you're chomping at the bit here. Go ahead.
Oh, it's real. Oh no, I'm 100% in agreement with Jacob. And it might shock him. Right now, I was just pulling up some stats from the VA, which, I trust the VA stats. Yeah, I trust the VA stats about because I trust Trump with his electoral counting. So the reality is, they're saying that 11 to 12% on average of our people are coming home with PTSD. PTSD is terrible, and it's something that's entirely avoidable especially for our veterans, because if they're not being bombed or bombing people, probably not going to develop too much PTSD. So I'm a big fan of stopping us bombing the Middle East, replacing a lot of the problems that they have in those countries with free market solutions. We talked last week about Cuba. Best thing we could do would be end the embargo. The best thing we can do in those other countries is to stop them from bombing like Yemen, Afghanistan, Iran, as much as the global world would love to go ahead and take Iran out, is going to be an insanely bloody war. So would love to see that end in our lifetime. But anyhow, did you want me to go into mine, Hodey?
Is Hodey frozen? For you
Yeah,
guys?
actually, yeah. I think Hodey is frozen, or I have stunned him into silence. This is awesome.
Hodey's frozen, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go in my piece of my mind real quick. So mine's really simple. Oh my god.
No,
We're
No.
all doomed.
I did not consent to this.
Dual Hodey.
I'm apparently appearing twice.
Hodey.
Yeah.
I wonder what happens if I remove this old Hodey from the stream. This could kick
No,
myself.
no.
I thought
No,
I
I'm there.
stunned you into
Okay.
silence. You're just sitting
Okay.
there, just like I was like, it wasn't that great. It wasn't that terrible. Okay, thanks, Hodey.
Yeah.
Mine is my piece of my mind. I'll just jump into it real quick. Here's Cori Bush. I don't know if you saw her today. She went ahead and came out during, I believe, an MSNBC prompt about defunding the police. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of defunding the police I'd love to do, but to defund the police, I think is probably a little drastic. But she said probably one of the most elitist things out there, and said, I'm going to make sure I'm going to have security. But you know what? So defunding the police still has to happen. Wait a minute. You're going to go take your position, your salary, or the government's money to protect yourself, but tell the people of your district, good luck. Oh, by the way, you can't have guns. Thanks for playing. One of the most elitist things you could think of, and thankfully a lot of people are coming back on her. But it is just funny to watch this kind of just unfold. Yes, there are a lot of things I would love to defund the police, especially when it comes to the drug war. I would love to see them get better training. I know that probably triggers a lot of bad things for people. But I don't think all cops are bad. I don't think all cops are good. Just like humanity and society, there's some real problem people, and there are some people that turn their eyes when something terrible happens, turn the other cheek. So I'm glad this one, though, is getting her enough attention to where hopefully it will be played as a recurring sound bit when she runs for election. However, I think it's going to get completely Cuomo'd by tomorrow.
Yeah, Cori Bush is paying a high price for this one. I mean, when even CNN and Fox News are both like teaming up to dunk on you, like you pretty much stepped in it, right? You're not making any friends.
But it gave them a great excuse not to talk about Cuomo.
It did, and they're using it, and it is. It was one of those speeches that kind of made me wonder if she's like okay. It was like a bit like incoherent,
like me.
Well, and I want to be nice, and I'm not trying to make this about like mental illness or anything, because that's like not something funny, but it seemed like something where you're just like, whoa, and maybe it's not mental, but like drinking or like, maybe if you take a Valium at the wrong time or something, I don't know. Like, it just seemed like something was really off, and we get that so few times because most of the time politicians are so protected and guarded and everything. And so this was a very much I mean, to put it in the Cuomo thing, remember when he's like, oh, if COVID's affected you, you should just go get another job. It's so easy, right? If we fired you from your job, you just go get a new job. Whereas Cori Bush is like, yeah, if we take away your defense, I'll just defend myself. You can probably do it too, right? With all your resources.
Or like the celebrities that were like, hey, everyone just stay home for months on end, but like they have these giant mansions they live in, and they're partying with all their friends and stuff anyway. It's like,
And none of them opened them up, even the extra wings, to let the people in that were homeless during COVID. I mean, this is a simple thing. They could have had a hell of a tax write-off, but none of them wanted to do it. Oh, well. Did I just lose Hodey again?
Oh no.
Okay,
Hodey,
every time I
Brian,
talk,
you
it
gotta
stuns
stop doing
Hodey
this
so
to
much. I
Hodey.
just shut up.
You need to stop doing this to Hodey, man. That's just
this is a
he's
violation of
been
the
a nice
This is a
host and-
violation of the NAP, Brian. I am contracting my private security force, and they are
He's
en
back.
route to your house right now.
Do you have audio?
All right. Well, before my internet just gives out completely, because obviously that's the direction things are going. Jacob, I did want to comment on yours a little bit. You're absolutely right with like a global idea of liberty. America is actually not the place that libertarianism is thriving the best right now. And it's hard because I think as an American mindset, we tend to think of ourselves as like the centerpiece for freedom. But like it is, like US, freedom, USA, and all us or whatever. And you know what? That may be true among some things, but there are other things that we're just not doing it well at. And there are other places where libertarians are doing really well. Brazil, notably, has a huge pocket of them. Cuba has a huge pocket of libertarians. And so we're over here fighting, the 1%, 2%, 3% fights. And there's some countries that are fighting the 10 to 20% fight. And it's important to connect with those people because their perceptions and their experiences are really awesome. I'm very much an American.
Yes, they got him. Okay, mental note. I'll go out and help Hodey fix his internet. But
Wow.
anyhow, we'll go and get Archie. Do you want to do your piece of mind?
Mic check.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, so I really wasn't sure what I was going to do for a piece of my mind tonight, and then I realized that there's a thread I want to write tomorrow to commemorate. And as the saying goes, all politics is local. I challenge everyone to get involved in politics because in the nuclear age, all politics is global. Tomorrow is the 76th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, where 64 kilograms of uranium were mixed with Einstein's E equals mc squared into a man-made sunrise at 8:15 a.m. Hiroshima time, August 6, 1945, and 80,000 to 100,000 lives were snuffed out in one instant with the single largest bomb to date, only matched 3 days later at Nagasaki. We now have bombs that make these look like toy firecrackers. We have 9 states with nuclear bombs. At least 4 of those have nuclear triads. So that's, strategic bombers, ICBMs, and SLBM capability. We have 2 states that each have close to 2,000 weapons ready and mounted on delivery systems to fight a war within the next hour. And that next hour could be this hour, or it could be an hour from now, or it could be 3 a.m, or it could be any time of day. And this is why I say all politics is global, at least for Americans, at least for, the people that can change this before we go over the edge. There are people in the third world that, they struggle day to day. They can't change anything. We have to do it for them. We have to think about the implications of American empire and the fact that essentially humanity is standing in a puddle of gasoline up to our waist. And you've got America with a lit match, and you've got Russia with a lit match, and you've got China with some lit matches, and France, the UK, India and Pakistan. There are actual reports modeling an India-Pakistan small nuclear war where you have 50 bombs released each, the number of people dead due to nuclear winter famine after a small war between those two powers would absolutely eclipse everything in human history. To say nothing about the fact that we are playing with, suicide as a species if Russia and the United States touch it all off. So on the 76th anniversary of Hiroshima, if we were to stay silent, if we were to have a moment of silence where 1 second was equal to the death of one Japanese person at ground zero, we would have to be silent all day tomorrow. So
Okay.
let's not, pretend ourselves that our politicians have any clue what they're doing. We have to go out and remind them that these weapons are still there, and that because they are assholes, we have to hold them accountable.
Odie, this is a completely different episode.
The nuclear bombs, yeah.
Oh yeah, no,
Sure.
I've been reading this book,
Atomic Salvation.
Yes, and
By who?
By Tom Lewis. He's an Australian writer. Went through and did the numbers on how many people would have died if we didn't use the bombs. As someone who would not be standing here, most likely, my grandfather was a reconnaissance pilot in World War II. Flew over most of Germany, got shot at many times, survived it, was getting ready to be shipped over to the Pacific theater when those two bombs were dropped. He probably wouldn't have survived. We can go into the details because we're running out of time, I know. Just a side note here, we were losing about 450 people just a day in general conflict, where we weren't even invading the islands. That doesn't even count the big days of Okinawa, going into all Saipan, Philippines, anything like that. The Japanese were losing about 3,000. So if you want to be quiet for all the people that died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I agree with you. It was a tragedy. But then if we went ahead and did that to Japan, like we did to defeat that empire and also the German Empire, we'd have to be quiet all friggin' week, maybe all month, because that's what would have happened.
I haven't run the numbers, and Brian, obviously, you having read a book about it and are reading a book about it, you're going to have more information than me. Blowing up an innocent person, I believe, is always wrong, and so I don't.
Amen.
I would love to think of another solution. I don't know. I don't know, Brian. We'll have another episode about this. We can talk about other things we could have done to Japan, or specifically to the people responsible for, the attack on American lives.
Can I also just say that?
Go ahead, Jacob.
Prevention is better than cure.
Oh yeah.
And so,
sure.
I mean, as much as we should do this episode at some point, and we'll definitely have a major clash on it. But as much as we can debate over how best to end a war once it starts, we should also be infinitely more focused on preventing wars before they even break out. And World War II was an entirely preventable war.
Oh, absolutely.
World War I was an entirely preventable war. And so we can't lose sight of that.
Almost all the big wars were entirely preventable because they were made by terrible decisions and terrible reactions, knee-jerk reactions. 9/11 was a knee-jerk reaction. We think they're there. We sat there for 5 days trying to figure out where they were, and then we just started bombing random places in Afghanistan because, you know what, we think he's there, and that might make us feel better. And here we are today, 20 years later.
And this is
why
I'm so for open borders and free trade, because if you do not have free travel of people and goods, bombs and troops will travel across instead.
Yeah.
And until we get to a point where where we normalize social cooperation and free trade, and we have to stop. We have to take the gun off the table and stop normalizing the use of of the military as a solution for any problem, whether it's domestic or geopolitical. Like we and I think all of us here, even from our different backgrounds and disagreements on some of these specific issues, we agree on that.
Yeah. Free trade fixes a lot of problems, like I talked about earlier. The black market trade between Saudis and the Israelis, between Egypt and Israel, has diffused more war than, because when I was growing up in the 80s, war with Saudi Arabia Israel was a given. War between the Soviets and the United States was a given, and the Russians going broke, Soviet Union going broke when Glasnost fixed a lot of that. So, yeah, you're right, Archie. It is pretty terrifying that we have all that. Somebody with a madman could start a nuclear war very easily, but that genie's out of the bottle. So I don't know how we put it back in, seeing as how it is far more complicated to make an iPhone than it is a nuclear weapon.
I read a book about Robert J. Oppenheimer, and there was a moment when the government was like, here's the thing, Robert J. Oppenheimer is sympathetic with other communists and socialists. And if you allow him to continue doing this research, that you won't have a nuclear bomb without him. Because in fact, even his colleagues wrote a letter saying, well, this won't get done without him. So
Fermi was pretty good. Fermi was helping things. I did a lot of research in this when I was younger. So
sure. And his colleagues could have just been like having his back or something.
No, they did.
But they wrote that it might not have been possible without him, or at least not possible in time, which was a big issue.
Which was the issue.
Yeah. And so they're like, we need him at his fullest, and the government actually had to make a gambit, and they said, well, we know if we let him continue, that the Soviets will get their hands on nukes as well. People who hate us get their hands on nukes, and they said, I guess we have to let them get their hands on nukes.
The Soviets already penetrated the Manhattan Project back in 1943.
Yeah.
They'd already penetrated it and already were getting information out. And as I said, it's not that hard to build a nuclear bomb. If I have plutonium right now, I could probably, with a machine shop, build one in a weekend.
Brian, you psychopath.
In Minecraft.
Archie, I'm going to let you finish off this because you brought it up. We hijacked it a little bit. I'll let you finish your point and then we'll say goodbye.
I would simply say that we need to bring that awareness to our activism and our politics, because if we don't, no one else will. There was a miracle that happened on September 26, 1983. Stanislav Petrov was in the chain of command on the Soviet side, and he decided to think like a human being, and he said, this doesn't make sense. I'm not passing this up the chain of command. And he prevented what probably would have been a total nuclear war. At that time, there were probably 55,000 warheads between the Soviet Union and the US. Currently mounted to systems, there's less than 4,000. There's about 3,800. 55,000 nuclear bombs, each of them larger than Hiroshima or Nagasaki. That's not sane. That is literally mad. That is literally the mutually assured destruction of the entire human race. And that's why we need to be aware of this. And that's why we need to make other people aware of this, so that we can unbuild these terrible things.
As Sting said, I hope the Russians love their children too. I don't love Sting on everything, but darn it, is he right on that one. Everybody, thank you so much for joining. I know this was a hot topic, but we managed to make it very pleasant. Everybody who viewed, I appreciate you sticking around with us till the end. Archie, Brian, Jacob, you're all fantastic people. Everybody listening, we love you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.